Good evening, everyone. Gareth Presch, founder of the World Health Innovation Summit, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our session this evening, part of our 16 days of activism promoting looking at gender-based violence. And we're joined by our guests this evening, and we're going to have a discussion around civil society's role and how can we activate civil society. Can I go to Lameck, who's in Kenya at the moment, and perhaps Lameck, you could do a short introduction and tell us who you are and where you're from. I think Lameck's on mute at the moment. Let's start with Michelle, who's in South Africa.
Hi, Gareth. Hi to all the listeners.
Thank you so much.
Let's start with Michelle, who's in. Whoops, we have a bit of a technical fault here. Michelle, carry on, please, and Lameck, we'll come back to you shortly.
The joys and pleasures of using technology. It doesn't always work as well as we want it to. I'm dialing in from South Africa. I'm the founder of Africans United, and we're really excited about participating in a conversation and raising the awareness about the impact of gender-based violence in Africa.
Thanks a million, Michelle. Lameck, if you could give us a quick introduction, that would be great.
Okay, thank you so much, Gareth.
Sorry there, we seem to have a bit of a problem there, Lameck, at the moment. Jenny, you're in London. Please give us a short introduction, and delighted you can join us on this Saturday evening.
Hi, Gareth. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is Jennifer Kitenge, and I'm the volunteer lead for WIS, and I also work for the government.
Thanks a million. I see we have a few technical problems at the moment, and Lameck, whenever you get a chance, see if you can unmute your mic there and see if it works at the moment. Oh, we still seem to be having problems. Let's start, Michelle. Engaging civil society. How do we do it? In terms of gender-based violence, the last couple of days we had an introduction from Deirdre around, setting the scene, and what we had then yesterday, we heard from Andrew, and he gave us a description of domestic violence, and it was quite a fascinating insight from the point of view of men and boys, and they're suffering from domestic violence and gender-based violence. How do we activate civil society from your perspective?
Is Lameck wanting to say something? Shall I just go ahead and fire off?
Yeah, please do. Please do. We'll come back to that.
Okay. Look, I think gender-based violence is certainly something that we all need to talk about and to think about. I think how we activate civil society is to remind everyone that we're actually bearing witness to what is happening in the world. And I think sometimes we forget what that word witness means. I mean, it would be to watch and see, somebody hurting another. And, what do? Do you just look the other way, have a cup of coffee, close your eyes and pretend you didn't see it? I think what we're seeing in the world and across the African continent is that we can't look the other way anymore. It's not acceptable because the traumas that women are experiencing, men are also experiencing in another way. But it is actually having a collective impact on our societies and our communities, and it's fast becoming a barrier for all of us in terms of being able to unlock our potential, build sustainable circular economies. So, what we're doing at Africans United is we're just having conversations. We're having conversations with people in our immediate communities. We're engaging in social media. We're setting up Zoom calls. We're doing it just wherever we can, however we can. And where we do bear witness, we're not looking the other way. We're offering a hand, a cell phone number, information about a safe place to go. And I think if collectively, each and every individual stopped looking the other way, that it would make a difference in terms of activating society and helping them to realize that looking the other way is perpetuating all sorts of other problems, that's causing all sorts of other challenges that we're all experiencing in our daily lives.
Absolutely. Let me try and bring in Lameck if the signal's okay at the moment. Lameck, can you hear us at the moment, or are we still having technical problems? We seem to be having problems for some reason. Jenny, you are very active in social media circles. Perhaps you could give us
so much, Gareth. I think now you can hear
Lameck
me.
is go. Okay, go ahead, Lameck. Please do an introduction.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Very active in social media circles. Perhaps you could give us an.
Hello, can you hear me now, Gareth? Okay, thank you so much. My name is Lameck Oyoo. I'm coming from Kenya. I work at Kisumu Cancer Organization. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much for this opportunity to engage on the role of civil society when it comes to gender-based violence advocacy. As you know that civil societies mostly are attached to the community, and the rich community, they work very closely with the community. And in most cases, you realize that first cases of GBV are reported within the civil society, especially the community-based organization that deals with the GBV. It's very saddening that during this period of COVID, Kenya, we have recorded 92.2% of GBV cases in the country. And you realize that out of the 92.2%, 80% are women and children. So these are some of the cases that were recorded and were captured by the civil societies around. So civil society play a very big role when it comes to gender-based violence at the community level. And also they do a lot when it comes to policy development, and also when it comes to advocacy.
Thanks very much for that, Lameck. Startling statistics there, really. Jenny, you're in London, big metropolitan city. What do you feel is the opportunity to engage large numbers of people? How do we tackle it? Education? What's your perspective?
So I think when you actually look at gender-based violence and you look at sexual gender-based violence, I think it's a structural issue, and I think it's born out of how people view the place of women. So I think what we need to kind of do now as a community is almost kind of influence the way people think, and the only way that you can kind of do that is by involving community members in your empowerment activities to teach young boys and men in particular that women are not objects. And I think in this day and age, social media plays an important role, I think, in raising the issue of gender violence in the public. And I think which in turn is important for forming the creation and the values in the society. So I think that is a good platform that we can kind of use in terms of education, in terms of offering almost kind of like that empowerment to young kids. So yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what we need to kind of do now, it's continuing to kind of empower, to teach and to educate, and to almost highlight the awareness, which I think we started to do, and there is progress. And I think the civil society organisations and NGOs also have a huge role and a huge responsibility in continuing the work and the progress that we're doing so far.
Yeah, some of the statistics yesterday that Andrew mentioned around, gender-based violence and some of the statistics worldwide are startling. And I think we have to acknowledge that there is a problem. The first way of solving a problem is to actually acknowledge that there is a problem. This is probably a wider problem than a lot of people understand. The 16 days of activism is the first time I actually heard of this initiative. And I think we have to look at one of the things I was trying to analyze over the last couple of days was, how do we solve these problems? Like, a lot of it goes back to, I suppose, schooling. Michelle, you're an educator, a lifelong educator. How do we embed this within our school curriculum, for example? How do we raise that awareness so that our children, are able to be prepared for the future?
Yeah, you're reminding me of a conversation I had just this afternoon with my daughter. We were going to a family function, and she just out of the blue said to me, "Mommy, why are women being hurt?" And it was quite startling for my 8-year-old daughter to be asking me that question, why are women being hurt? But when you talk about how do we go to the root cause, one, we've got to look at the parents. We play a very important role as parents to children. The wounds that children are experiencing are wounds that we carry through our adult years. Got to go below the waterline and really deal with those traumas and those issues. I'm doing some work with the NGO called the Pocket Project that was started by Thomas Hubel, looking at collective trauma and the role that trauma is actually playing and contributing towards these barriers that prevent us from enabling environments and societies where we can address climate action, where we can address gender-based violence. So, I mean, if you look at some of the work of Dr. Dan Siegel as an example, they talk about attachment theory. So the relationship that you have with your parents, which is what we're teaching adults in relationships, or even those who are not in relationships, plays a role in how you engage. So were your parents emotionally available? Were they there for you? What was your response as a child? I mean, these play a real role in, how you engage and be in relationship. I said to my daughter this afternoon that we must remember that when people hurt one another, hurt people. And that really when a man inflicts a pain or a hurt on a woman, he's actually crying out. He's crying out for help and to be seen and to be loved. And it really just, for us to be able to address the root cause, one, we need to start supporting parents and educating them about the role of being present and engaging with their children and with their boys and with their girls, to teach them about self-respect and boundaries, for us as adults to know what boundaries are. And I think if we can start looking at, well, what are my traumas as an adult? And how do I integrate that in my life so that I don't stand in judgment of others, so that I know that I can actually feel worthy and whole in relationship with another. So I think there's two aspects here. One, we need to support the parents in schooling environments. We need to support the teachers in terms of, when they're seeing issues come up and how boys and girls are relating to one another, that they're having that relationship with the parents. But also we need to teach boys about boundaries, about self-respect, about the fact that we're equal. And I think those are some of the soft skills that, while they're embedded in life orientation and life skills as a curriculum, I also think that there are some other skills that are missing, things like mindfulness and presencing and emotional regulation and those sorts of things that Dr. Daniel Goldman and the likes of Emory University are putting together. As a curriculum, I also think that there are some other skills.
Let me go to Lameck. Perhaps you could give us an insight into the stigma and gender-based violence in terms of a topic from an African context. And one of the things that Andrew mentioned last night was that you should talk to somebody about it. And probably maybe you could give us an understanding of what is it like from an African context. Is this something that is just a taboo subject that people don't talk about? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and how do we reach those people, and how do we raise that awareness? Somebody about it. Probably maybe could give us an understanding what is it like from an think we have a...
Okay, thank you so much, Gareth, on the same. I know a lot of stigma comes when it comes to gender-based violence. Am I clear? Are you getting me? Hello, are you getting me?
I think we have a...
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Lameck. We just seem to be having some technical problems.
Hello?
Probably Wi-Fi signal. Jenny, you perhaps could comment in terms of stigma around gender-based violence. I think some of the points Michelle was making, very valid. People who are hurt other people. This is something, though, that I think is a generational thing that we can't really get away from, because this comes from the fact that as at childbirth, we were, in our 40s now, or 30s, or, we were taken away from our mothers. So we didn't have that skin to skin, which is a release of oxytocin. So when your brain develops and things like that. So that's quite a challenging thing, but it's something that we have to make sure we don't make that same mistake twice, or, continuously do that. Stigma wise, what's your context from or what's your perspective?
So I think my perspective, I've lived in the UK for 27 years, and I've got family that still live back home in the Congo. And I think the feedback that I've had from them is that, it's, where you have, where you've got violence doesn't only just affect women, but men also suffer from it as well. But it is true that most of the victims in Africa are predominantly women. And I think that's due to the fact that because of the place of women within the African culture and their vulnerabilities, they are more susceptible to, facing domestic violence. And I think in terms of its structure, I think it is born out of a place of the view on how they perceive women to kind of be. And I think what needs to happen within the African community, I think there needs to be some sort of engagement and some sort of dialogue in terms of a woman's place in society. And that starts off, from a very young age, in terms of having those open and frank conversations of, respect, emotional intelligence, and just, changing the narrative around the stereotypes that are associated with men and the stereotypes that are associated with women. And also teaching boys, men, in terms of emotional intelligence, how to treat women, and vice versa. And I think it's once we're able to have those open dialogues and have those honest and frank conversations, then we'll be in a place to kind of move forward. But I think right now in some cultures, this is a topic that some people are still kind of frightened to have a conversation about because they're scared, and if you are living in a society where this is considered to be the norm, you don't really know any better. So I think it's about having those conversations and having people that can kind of have those honest debates, I think.
And this probably, Michelle, is the opportunity for technology, isn't it? Because this is, a great way of overcoming barriers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenny raises a really valid point, is that we need to start having these conversations. I think what the World Health Innovation Summit is doing and these types of talks, there are these nuggets and these places on social media that women today can go and find and listen and see, oh, actually, well, they're saying something, maybe, am I in a relationship that's healthy, that's normal, is this right? So I think the 16 days of activism and everybody really participating in conversations, whether it be a social media post or a talk, it's really important that we start creating and flooding the internet with content that women and young people today can start to find, to really also start to question if what they're experiencing is normal or not. Because to Jenny's point, a lot of this is not discussed. It's often a case of, oh, I did something wrong, I deserved it, or I brought this upon myself. And that's not the case. Somebody hurting somebody else, that says more about them than it says about you. So, I really appreciate that we're having this conversation. And I think it's so unfortunate that Lameck can't get into this conversation with technology. But these are also the very real challenges, right? So, you're a woman and you're in a crisis and you're in an experience, you may not have access to data. You may not be able to get somewhere safe to be safe. These are real realities, not just on the African continent, but I'm sure also across and around the world, that there are so many barriers that women go through to reach for safety, to find a safe place. And the more that we can create these signals and these lights of hope, the better we can be to start creating a world that is a lot more unified.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's a complex topic. There's no quick solution here. For many people, like you say, the cultural situation, we live in different places around the world. Some people have human rights, some don't, unfortunately. So there's persecution that goes on. Digital technology can, change that in certain contexts, and when it's used appropriately. The tech companies of the world, the big ones, have huge influence. And perhaps it's really when they start aligning themselves to the SDGs, SDG 5, for example, gender equality, then we may see some, appropriate action here. Jenny, in terms of using these tools, where are the opportunities for women and men to, I suppose, first of all, share their stories? Where, simple processes. It may sound simple to people, but how do they start?
So I think one of the good things that I can honestly say is that I think civil society has potential to play a major role in ending violence against women. And I think the engagement and the advocacy work carried out, for example, by NGOs, I think lays a ground for the spread of gender inequality and means issues. And I think they are also important actors in providing knowledge on gender issues and language and arguments for new gender norms. And then I think one of the also important things that we have in this day, which we're more privileged, is social media. So we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, where people are actively able to kind of raise their issues, and you see people actually telling their stories and being vocal about the issues that they have experienced with domestic violence. And I think that within itself creates a platform where, for somebody that is a victim of domestic violence, they feel that they have a voice and they're able to voice their opinions. So I think these are the sort of tools where it comes to social media. I think it's a good platform where people feel that they can outrightly, openly, not just express their views, but there's also information in terms of what they can kind of do if they are a victim of domestic violence.
Lameck, can you hear me now? I know you've just come back in. Or are we still having technical problems? I think we still are. There's a bit of a lag, I think, here. Michelle, I wanted to talk about disabilities, minority groups, because I was going to ask Lameck the question around, cancer awareness and gender-based violence, when you're dealing with clinical issues, perhaps. How do we reach these minority groups? Because Jenny mentioned Facebook and other areas and other platforms that are there. How do we, gender-based violence with shall we say, in the context of disabilities, for example, it's an area we need to reach out to as well, isn't it? Because this is a wider issue.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier just how complex this issue is. I see Lameck. Listen, Lameck, just start speaking while I'm speaking, just so we can bring you into the conversation. But yeah, Gareth, this is where, it's got to be an omni-channel approach. We can't just use technology. This is where we need to engage and mobilize with social workers, with rural clinics, with clinics in communities, where the community WhatsApp groups and the community leaders really need to be engaged. And that's certainly our approach at Africans United, is identifying who are the ones who are saying, I want to be a community leader. Who are the social workers who are, whether they be working with Childline or really just engaged in the local church or the community. Those are certainly ways that, create access and opportunity and support for those who are disabled and disadvantaged significantly more than anybody else would be, because I think that the challenges that they face are twice as insurmountable, having to deal with gender-based violence as well as everything else that they have to deal with in their life. But we've seen some incredible stories where, those disabilities can really teach us a thing or two. I was on a call recently with Grasa Michelle's daughter, and she experienced gender-based violence. She lost her eye through that incredible experience. But it has not stopped her from being an activist, from talking about her experience in such very personal and in a vulnerable way, and really just been such a voice for what African women are going through, but also, in when we're experiencing the fear and the anxiety, that one can also just choose the courage. And I think regardless of what your situation or where you're at, we do have a choice, and we can make those choices.
I think you make a very important point there. It is not just about technology. Jenny, in terms of sort of support, a cup of tea, one of the things Andrew said last night, which really stuck in my mind, was he was talking about, what should you do if you're in this situation, is actually you have to meet somebody and talk to them about it like a friend. Have you any advice for people in terms of how they go about that? I know there's plenty of agencies, NGOs who do a lot of work, but I suppose, again, it comes down to trust in that individual. How do you express that to certain people? Will they understand your situation? Because one of the things that Andrew was saying yesterday was that, everyone would say you need to man up, you need to, how can you be beaten up by your wife? These were the sort of things. Have you any suggestions on how people can seek help?
So I think we need to start having these conversations. So the same way now that we've opened up the room for us to discuss mental health, I think something similar needs to happen as well, where we are, openly having these conversations, and we are, opening the channel for communication, and just letting people know that it is okay to, have these conversations, and there is help out there, and there is support out there for people that genuinely need it. And I think domestic violence is a sensitive topic, and I think for some people they might not necessarily want to kind of have that conversation because they don't feel that they're ready to have that conversation. But I think it's about making people, or creating that platform where people feel safe. And I think a lot of the time, it's just about being there, being a friend, and having a listening ear, and yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right. It's having that being there for that person and having that understanding ear. I don't know, Lameck, can you hear us? It would be good to get your context on this, because I know you're very active in social media and you do a lot of work on the ground. How you can support people, understand their situation, gender-based violence. Can you hear us now, or? I think we're still having problems. Michelle, we'll come to you. Just from an educational perspective, if we look to the future, because let's focus on solutions, how do we now look at bringing this to the next level? Do we go towards school curriculums? Do we start engaging at the coalface, education at an early age?
I think you said it there, engaging at the coalface, and something that Jenny was also talking about. And I think it's something we're starting to see more and more, are these conversations. Interestingly, I think it's tomorrow night, CNN has got a new show that Lisa Ling produced, where they've taken prisoners, incarcerated men, and they've paired them with young boys. And they've taken them on a journey and a series of conversations for them to get perspective. And these criminals have really just shared their stories and, in turn, the boys, their own vulnerabilities. And I really think that we need to be doing more of that, is have conversations with those that are hurting women, with those that are hurting men, and bring those conversations together and just listen and hear and start to sense and see collectively what are some of those solutions, what might that look like, what might they do, what are the possibilities. I think, we're raised in a very particular way. We have very particular experiences. But what that means is that we have these kind of sunglasses on. We look at life with a filter on. And the only way to break out of those bubbles and to take those sunglasses and filters off is to bring diverse perspectives into a room so that you can just for a moment sit back and start to listen and start to hear. And I think we need to start doing more of that, because we need to start thinking collectively, because the solution for one community might be different for another country. And I think what we also then need to start surfacing, and I'm sure this is something that Wiz would be a part of, is surface those stories, surface those insights, so that there is a place where we can go to, where we can learn and replicate those ideas and those initiatives in other communities. So I think it builds on what you were saying around going to the cold face. I want to talk to a rapist. I want to talk to a man that is abusing a woman. And I want to give my perspective, and I want us to have a conversation. I don't think we've seen a conversation like that necessarily take place publicly, where you can almost, it's like you're watching a fishbowl. But really the provocative nature of those conversations can really kind of open up the possibilities for us to have compassion for that individual that's hurting another, and for those who are inflicting pain on another, to have compassion for those who are hurting and who continue to maybe hurt. And then those symptoms show up in other ways. We really just need to start having more conversations with one another. And I think the pandemic has enabled this conversation and more conversations. And if anything, what we're seeing now is that we are seeing. And that's exciting. I think that creates the hope. So, I think the schools are doing a good job in terms of life orientation and those sorts of things. But I think parents also need to start having these conversations quite pointedly around the dining room table. And, shows like what CNN are producing, they create the opportunity for you to sit with your child and watch a piece of content that creates the opportunity to have a discussion. And I think those are some ideas that we need to see start getting more mainstream and in the media, is give me a piece of content that I can watch with my kid, with my son, where we can have a conversation, because that's also at the cold face. That's at the root. I'm raising a son, not for myself, but for the world and for tomorrow, and potentially to be in relationship with a woman or another that I don't want to be hurt by however I was involved in raising this particular kid, and for the adults to realize the same in whatever that journey is that they need to go on.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think you're right about giving that platform. It's I mean, part of what we're trying to do here with the WISP platform is to give people those opportunities, to allow people, to communities also to raise these issues, because as I said at the start, unless you admit there's a problem, you can't solve it, So unfortunately, many of our, part of taboos in social society is that we just kind of say, well, that doesn't exist because we don't talk about it. So we need to start talking about it initially, as you say, have the conversations, then study and analyze why these situations come about. They're very complex situations, because one of the things is you have to look at how do you get to that point, So if you're in a relationship, for example, and you fall in love with someone or whatever it may be, that's for a particular reason. And then all of a sudden things change over the course of that relationship, and certain things trigger certain reactions and certain things happen. What we have to do is understand why that happens. And as I said, it could be as simple as going back 20 years. You talked about the prisoners, for example. One of the things I've looked at in the past is a documentary around those on death row, and most of them have frontal corneal damage. They've damaged part of their brain, the empathy side of life, you know. So these are sort of things that we need to look at around with gender-based violence. Jenny, you know, in terms of next steps and where you would like to see, you know, we're having the 16 days of activism, and this is where we get the conversation going. Where do you feel we need to go next in terms of, you know, tangible actions? Because we've 243 million women and girls were abused by an intimate partner last year. 243 million. That's unbelievable number. And less than 40% of the women who experienced the violence reported it or seek help. Right? How do we now help those women and make sure next year we bring that number down? You know, I think if 16 days of activism is going to work and gender-based violence, we're going to have an impact, we need to look at those stats.
So tapping into, you know, me being a civil servant, I think one of the things that the government needs to do, which I think they are starting to do, is to kind of have or take a more of a hardline approach in terms of putting more policies and tougher punishments for offenders that commit these offence. So, for example, I think a lot of, you know, victims that I have spoken to that have experienced violence, one of their concerns that they've said to me is that they feel that, you know, they don't take domestic violence issues as serious as perhaps maybe somebody that's committed a drug offence. So I think the government needs to kind of take more of a hardline approach in terms of clamping down on the violence and also recognising that, yes, the physical bruises might disappear, but there's also the emotional impact that that victim has to deal with perhaps on a daily basis, and they may never be able to recover from that. So I think those are one of the issues that I think we need to kind of focus on. And I think we also, you know, as a civil servant, I have a priority and I have a responsibility of ensuring that the public are safe and that we create an environment where the community feels safe. And even things, for example, like setting up a neighborhood watch or a community patrol. So these are all things that we could actively do to kind of create that community where, you know, people feel that if they are experiencing this, they know that there is, you know, a patrol police that they can kind of get in touch with, or there's a community support advisor that, you know, that lives a couple of blocks away from them, that they can kind of get in contact with them. So I think it's making sure that, you know, we have these support places that people can actually go to if they experience domestic violence, and working with not only just the government officials, but also working with schools, working with hospitals, working with the communities to kind of make sure that we are all kind of engaged and, you know, we're ready to kind of support these victims that experience this.
I think that's, you know, all brilliant points that we're making as well. And I'm sure, Michelle, you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you know, I mean, we're talking about civil society and the role that kind of NGOs and community organizations play. But I also think that we must remember that, you know, companies, right? If you're not investing in nonprofit organizations and community organizations, they must remember that if your community is dead, your company is dead. You know, and these women are the bread and butter of communities, as well as the men. So I also just wanted to make the point that this is a collective effort, that civil society cannot do this very complex work on its own. We all have to come together and be in conversation to figure out what are the best ways and what are the nuances that require different solutions to be addressed in different ways.
I'm in complete agreement. And I think it's like, how do we raise that awareness and that understanding, that learning within civil society? And what I mean by that is like just generally people understanding what are the signs of domestic violence, gender-based violence. How do you understand that that person who you're talking to may be in an awkward situation, may need that, you know, handout to say, how are you feeling? You know, that's just a simple thing to say. It sounds simple, but it can have such a profound effect. And I suppose we know lots of people, and I suppose society as well has become a lot withdrawn. You'll see with the pandemic at the moment, we're not able to talk to each other, so we're online, we're digital, and we're not interacting. So you see that, you know, this is certainly a problem, you know. So because we are social animals, you know, we really want to engage and work with each other and talk to each other. So they're big challenges. I think I'd just like to put final word to both of you. Like, thanks very much for your time this evening, and everyone tuning in and joining in. And if you have any questions afterwards, please do pop it in the chat box and we can follow up. Michelle, last word from you in terms of your final thoughts on, you know, gender-based violence and civil society.
I think it's just really simple. Don't look the other way. And just listen, reach a hand out. And for those in organizations, just keep an eye out. If you've got somebody who has not switched their camera on for a Teams call or a video call in weeks, something might be up. We've got a new culture that's emerging through the pandemic and because of all this engagement. So look also out for things that may seem a bit off, and don't look the other way. Bear witness.
And Jenny, last word to yourself, and what's your thoughts?
So my thought is, you know, in order for us to kind of create a society where everybody feels safe, I think requires some level of understanding of safety. And the way to achieve this, I think, is through commitments, having these dialogues. And also, you know, it starts with yourself. So, you know, you educating yourself and putting yourself in that position where, you know, you can then offer your services, even if it's, you know, you helping one person, that goes a long way. So I think it's being the change that you want to kind of be. And also, yeah, just continuing to speak about these things, continuing to engage with the right people. I think it goes a long way.
Thanks for that, Jenny, and thanks for that, Michelle. I think this comes down to values ultimately as well. You know, just promoting the values that you know, be the change you want to see. You know, it's a simple slogan. I just want to thank everyone for joining in this evening. I know it's a Saturday evening, and really appreciate your input here, and also this recording. And you know, we'll also share this on podcasts as well. And just to let you know that tomorrow evening we have health responses to gender-based violence, treating the immediate and long-term impacts. We'll look at the mental health impact of gender-based violence as well over the long term. We talked about it this evening as well, the psychological impact of domestic violence, for example. And then coming up as well, we'll have education for prevention of gender-based violence, financial violence as a form of gender-based violence. We'll also have human trafficking, modern slavery and gender-based violence, women in healthcare, gender-based discrimination and workplace harassment. And then the last two sessions around policing and the UN SDGs as a vehicle for addressing gender-based violence, which I see Michelle and Jenny both championing at the moment. So we are just really delighted that you could join us this evening, and we look forward to bringing this conversation forward. And I think one of the mechanisms that we will use is next year, let's look at those stats as a task for all of us, is to go out there and see if we can help those in need and make that impact and be that change. So good evening from us all, and I'll just sign off. And thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.